just trying to, there we go. All right, so there's a few different sections in my presentation. So it's divided into three key parts. So first we're going to talk about concussion basics. So we're going to go over what a TBI is, traumatic brain injury, and why it's a concern amongst the military and veterans populations, as well as the general population. We'll go over different types of traumatic brain injury, including concussion, which is the most prevalent form of traumatic brain injury, is called a concussion. And then we'll also talk about in section 2, concussion symptoms and recovery time. In this section, we'll go more into depth into concussions and what to look out for in the process of recovery and what that process looks like of recovery. Lastly, we'll talk about resources that are available both to veterans, service members, their families, as well as the community and people that are served by the public health departments and the libraries like yourself. So first, let's delve into that topic of TBI. I'll refer to traumatic brain injury as TBI. So this first topic we'll delve into what constitutes a TBI, the different severity levels, and the main causes of injury, so what we're seeing, okay? So this is the definition of traumatic brain injury as defined by the Department of Defense. And so my position is 100% funded by Defense Health Agency. So the information that we received has been well researched through our Defense Health Agency and our VA partners, Veterans Hospital partners. And so you'll hear a lot of talk about DoD and the VAs. So, but this can, like I mentioned before, this can be related to any population. So our definition is a precise explanation of traumatic brain injury. And it's important to remember that to have a traumatic brain injury, there must be an event as well as subsequent clinical signs, okay? And in addition to this definition that you're seeing on the screen right there in front of you, there's severity levels. So there's mild, moderate, and severe. So mild is the most common, and we often refer to that as a concussion. So a mild traumatic brain injury is the same thing as a concussion. You'll see that some places, maybe if you're looking at your medical chart, you'll see MTBI, mild traumatic brain injury. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that a concussion is the same thing as a traumatic brain injury. It's just a mild traumatic brain injury, okay? And then there's different types of traumatic brain injury, which is open and closed. So you can have a brain injury that penetrates the skull and one that is closed, which means it hasn't penetrated the skull. And we'll cover some of those in this presentation. And so most, like I mentioned before, most of the injuries are classified as mild traumatic brain injuries or concussions, and that'll be our main focus of today's talk because those are the most prevalent, what we're seeing in the veteran population, the service member population, as well as the general population. Most of what we're seeing is concussion or mild traumatic brain injury. All right, so we'll use those terms interchangeably, MTBI, concussion, or traumatic brain injury. And you can get a concussion even if you're wearing a helmet. So I wanted to make sure that you knew of a couple of these disclaimers. Demystify all those different myths that you may be hearing. You could still get a concussion if you're wearing a helmet. It does protect your head, and it could save your life in certain circumstances. So it's really important to have a well-fitted helmet to that particular person's head, because all of our heads are very different. Our skull is different. But it can't prevent a concussion in all cases. So you'll often hear traumatic brain injury or concussion described as an invisible injury or an invisible wound of war, because more often than not, TBI cannot be seen physically, except for the cases of those penetrating or open head wounds. All right. So let's define how we can determine if somebody's had a traumatic brain injury or concussion. So one of these clinical signs that the medical staff is going to be looking for is a decreased level of consciousness, or they may refer to it in your medical chart as an LOC, loss of consciousness. So any period of loss of consciousness can indicate that you've had a concussion or a more severe form of traumatic brain injury. So anything up to 30 minutes is considered mild traumatic brain injury in relation to this clinical indicator. So if this is, what they're looking at, this part of it can be, a mild traumatic brain injury is 30 minutes or less of being unconscious. Anything 30 minutes to 24 hours is considered moderate. And anything above 24 hours is considered severe. So people might use the word like blacked out or unconscious, and those are indicators that they've lost their consciousness for a certain period of time. And that's what the doctor is really going to be looking for. Another clinical indicator that the doctor will be looking for is any loss of memory, and it could be referred to as post-traumatic amnesia. They may call it PTA, post-traumatic amnesia, and this can occur either before or after the event itself. So anything up to 24 hours is considered mild in nature. Anything above 24 hours but less than 7 days is considered moderate, and anything above 7 days is considered severe. So you're seeing a trend here, right? So you're seeing that the symptoms could be pretty extreme for like what I would feel if I lost my consciousness for up to 30 minutes. I would think, wow, that's pretty serious. So just because a concussion is a mild traumatic brain injury does not mean that it's, the symptoms are mild for some people. So you want to make sure that you take that into account and don't discount concussions, because they are very serious. Okay. All right, so another clinical indicator that the doctor is going to be looking for is an alteration in mental state or an alteration in your consciousness. So you could see it on a medical record as AOC, and it could also be described, as an alteration in mental state. It can occur as confusion, disorientation, maybe slowed thinking, and anything up to 24 hours is still considered mild in nature, right? So you could be having a hard time remembering people's names, doing math problems that were once easy for you. That can all happen with an alteration in mental state. So maybe you really liked doing crossword puzzles, or and you're not able to do them as well for up to 24 hours. So that would be considered mild still. Anything above that 24-hour period is considered moderate to severe. So they're really going to be looking at other clinical indicators that we mentioned before in relation to this. So they take all of them into account to come up with that diagnosis of mild, moderate, or severe traumatic brain injury. Okay. Here is all of those things put together. So amnesia up to 24 hours. So this is the scale. This is what they're going to be looking for when you go in and get yourself checked out after you've had a concussion or a traumatic brain injury of some type. So these are the things that they're going to be looking for. They also take into account something called a Glasgow Coma Scale. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the Glasgow Coma Scale, because that's medical terminology that not everybody has a deep understanding of. But it's important to know that a Glasgow Coma Scale may be used when you go in, and the doctors use that as part of your diagnosis plan. So it's important to remember that the severity is noted at the time of injury, and it's not based at all on the severity of symptoms, right? So at the time of that injury, it's really, really important to go get seen by a medical professional as soon as possible, because that severity, that recovery process, the help that you receive, it's all dependent on getting seen right away. So they can rate that severity. They can start you on the road to recovery. And there are different levels of severity presented during screening. And, the higher level of severity is always recorded. So we want to make sure that they get the most care possible. So a provider may request neuroimaging for the patient. However, a mild traumatic brain injury or concussion does not normally present on CT scans or imaging. And we're doing a lot of research at Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center and within the VA system, and even in the general public. Researchers are finding more ways to learn from those images and to get neuroimaging at a better place. But just be aware that a concussion may not show up on the neuroimaging that you receive. And it could show the doctor really important things like a brain bleed. So if you're bleeding internally in your brain, it's really important to get that under control. And the doctor may request neuroimaging for that. And that would be very helpful in determining if you've had a bleed in your brain. This is just a picture of the Glasgow Coma Scale that I mentioned before. And these are the things that they're taking into account in that Glasgow Coma Scale. So they rate these different things, eye-opening response, best verbal response, your motor responses are all taken into account, and then they give you a score. So that's also used in that clinical diagnosis. But I mentioned I wasn't going to go over this in much detail because it's very medical jargon and I don't want to confuse people. But if you have other questions about the Glasgow Coma Scale, I'm happy to answer those at the end of this presentation. All right, so what's a concussion, right? So another way to define is a blow or jolt to the head that disrupts the normal functioning of the brain. As a reminder, there are 3 levels of severity for traumatic brain injury: mild, moderate, and severe, with mild being the most common, right? When people have had a concussion, a lot of times they'll say things like they've had their bell rung, they got knocked on the head. They might not necessarily have had a concussion, but it's important to be screened as close to that event as possible to determine the diagnosis and begin that treatment process. So prolonging that screening process and treatment can hinder the recovery process. So we've all, I've come in contact with people that have had a head injury, they've never gotten it treated, and they've had worse symptoms as time goes by, right? And you don't want to find out that you've had a concussion or a traumatic brain injury years ago and you're still suffering those symptoms because the treatment outcome isn't as positive. It's not as much in your favor if you wait several years to get checked out for a traumatic brain injury. There are things that they can do. So please go in and get seen by medical personnel if you've had a concussion a long time ago and you're having symptoms. But just know that it's really important to get screened right away. All right, so this is what we're seeing in our military population. And I mention this because most people think of traumatic brain injury and they think of vehicle blast or rollover. They think of, bullet wounds penetrating the skull. They don't realize that 82.8% in the last quarter of 2019 was a mild traumatic brain injury. Mild doesn't mean that it's not serious, right? Because we know now that concussion is serious, but it's considered mild in nature. So 342,000 since the year 2000 have had a mild traumatic brain injury. And of all severities, our service members have suffered all of these different severities of traumatic brain injury. And there's been about 413,858 service members throughout the world who have sustained a traumatic brain injury. Now, this data that we're looking at right here is available on our website, and it changes every quarter. So we're the task force. We're tasked with having a surveillance system for all branches of the military, and we make sure those numbers are available on our website. This only takes into account that first head injury. So if a person has had multiple head injuries, the multiple head injuries won't be shown on this data. There's different data for that. So just wanted to let you know about these numbers. So yeah, so the Army accounts for the most concussions because they're the biggest organization. There's also soldiers' jobs tend to put them in different situations where they may get a concussion. But if you compare the number of active duty personnel in each branch to the number of injuries, in 2011, for example, a soldier and a Marine had a similar risk. The Army just shows as the most traumatic brain injuries because they're the largest service. And fewer than 20% of these injuries happened while deployed. Most of these happen during training accidents in garrison, and many of the common causes of concussion is, day-to-day situations like motor vehicle crashes and falls, which is the same in our non-military populations. So in our civilian population, the number one reason for traumatic brain injury across all age groups is from a fall, from little kids all the way through older adults. And the same with our military population, our service members. Okay? All right. So these are our common causes, more information about that. So despite popular opinion, the causes are very similar in the military compared to civilian life. So they look very similar, as we can tell here. So military context aside, concussion is also very common in the civilian world. Among civilians, they're more common in men. And this is because of they're frequently involved in high octane activities like contact sports, riding motorcycles, those type of activities. So they're more common in men than women throughout the different age groups. All right, so we're on to section 2. And in this section, we're going to discuss concussions more in depth, including symptoms, recovery, and also we're going to talk about impact. All right, so expectations for recovery. What do we expect when we're recovering from a traumatic brain injury? So recovery time for a TBI, traumatic brain injury, varies based on each individual, but it begins within minutes of receiving that concussion or traumatic brain injury. You may start to feel better within a few hours, a few days, but it could take several weeks to fully recover from a traumatic brain injury or concussion. There are things that you can do to get better faster, and they're listed here. Rest, gradually returning to activity, healing, right? There's so nowadays we don't want person to just sleep it off. We don't want people to just totally rest, especially with our young children. We want them to do a gradual return to activity pretty quickly after they've received that concussion. So that data has changed, that the research on that has changed in the last few years. So we really want to gradually return them to activity as soon as possible. And that would be handled by the medical professional. So letting that body and mind rest after a TBI is still very important. So think of it as like nursing a sprained ankle. So you wouldn't go out for a run today if you sprained your ankle yesterday. You would take it easy until it got better. Maybe you put a little bit of weight on it as the doctor recommends. But yeah, you would rest and then slowly get back into running. So you wouldn't go out running the next day. Same with the traumatic brain injury. So limiting physical and cognitive exertion, including stimulants, video games, and all activities with screens is what they may recommend, what your doctor may recommend. So just so your brain can rest, but we are going to want to see a gradual return to activity. All right, so let's talk about symptoms. So the physical impact of concussion. So headache is the most common physical symptom of a concussion. So, but you also may see these different symptoms like sleep disturbances, fatigue, ringing in the ears, being sensitive to light. You may see someone wearing sunglasses inside. So you may be going inside a store and it's pretty well lit, but it's not a lot of direct sunlight. And you may see someone it may look kind of funny that they're wearing dark sunglasses. And it could be because they've had a traumatic brain injury and they're still suffering from vision problems or light sensitivity. So it's important to keep that in mind. That could be a red flag or a flag to let you know that that person has had a traumatic brain injury. Another thing that you may see is the person may speak differently. They may slur their speech. You may think of them as maybe they are intoxicated, but that's not always the case, right? If they could have had a traumatic brain injury that affected their speech. So that's also common, having that speech affected. Even if the person is recovered, their body is recovered, the speech may take a little bit longer to recover, or depending on the person and the injury, and that may be their new speech pattern. So you never know what someone's going through, and try to be sensitive to people that have had a traumatic brain injury. They may look different. You may not see that wound, but they may present differently through their speech and their sensitivity to light. Okay. So remember, each person that has sustained a concussion might have different symptoms, and again, different recovery times depending on that person. You'll also commonly see sleep disturbances following a concussion, which can often be seen through restless sleep, waking up multiple times a night, and this can lead to increased fatigue and also headache perpetuation. So often providers want to get your sleep under control first if this is one of your symptoms. So it's really important. Sleep and getting those headaches under control is really, really, really important. That's our first line of defense, what doctors want to help with. All right, so cognitive, in other words, thinking, the processes of the mind is also considered cognitive. It's a definition for cognitive. And so this could be thinking, reasoning, or remembering. You could have symptoms of TBI that affect thought process, memory issues. Sometimes people say they just can't focus like they used to. They can't remember things like they used to. And that could be symptoms of a traumatic brain injury or concussion. Feeling stuck on an activity, maybe your mind wanders. It could be seen as ADHD symptoms, like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, where they're just not able to focus. That could be one of the ways that it's seen. And maybe you don't realize that that person may have had a traumatic brain injury. They're not trying to dismiss you or not listen, but maybe they've had some issues with a brain injury that affect that part of their brain and their ability to focus on what you're saying. Okay. All right, so behavioral impact of a concussion or traumatic brain injury. So there's different emotional symptoms that someone can encounter, maybe feeling anxious, irritable, things that you once thought was just not a big deal now they make you more frustrated, anxious, angry, causing you to lose your temper easier or quicker than you may have prior to that concussive event. So those are all things to remember when you're working with people with traumatic brain injury. If you have a loved one with a TBI, these are some things that you want to keep in mind, that these things may happen or they may come up, and just to be patient, right? All right. So these are the different impacts that we're seeing that concussion has on our service members. Decreased marksmanship performance, situational awareness, being able to perform under pressure, multitasking, and this can be related to our general population as well. And it affects self-esteem and self-confidence. It really affects someone emotionally when they can't perform like they have in the past. So these are some things to keep in mind. So fear of not being able to perform in operational environments. So not being able to, maybe not being able to recognize people as quickly or have, being able to shoot and aim properly like they used to, or not shooting when they're supposed to, which can put their whole team in danger. So those are things that we're really trying to get a handle on traumatic brain injury for our service members. And these things they can affect the general population as well. All right. So approaches to recovery, right? So how you approach recovery is important, and try to take a holistic attitude towards recovery using your mind and your body both together in unison. It's important to avoid things like heavy exertion, alcohol use following a traumatic brain injury. Those can really hinder the recovery process. Stimulants, oftentimes we hear from our service members that they drink up to 10, energy drinks a day. I mean, some of our young people drink a lot of energy drinks or a lot of coffee just to stay alert. So the doctor may work with them on a gradual step down from caffeine, so they eliminate that, or they reduce that, the headaches that come from caffeine withdrawal. So rest is important. Just remember that. Slowly returning to activity is also very important. You don't want to just stop your whole life because you've had a concussion, but you want to work with the doctor to resume your normal activities slowly. Okay. And let them know every step of the way how you're feeling about that progression in your return to activity. Okay. Yeah, so that's really important. All right, so approaches to mental health recovery, right? Avoiding, like I mentioned, those energy drinks and coffee. They really have a large impact on our minds. So, and our memory, on concentration, and our sleep. We really want to get sleep after a traumatic brain injury. We want to get with the doctors, working with that doctor, of course. So everything I'm saying, the doctor will either tell you, the same thing, or they may work with you on a different progression. And you know what? The doctor trumps everything, because they're a licensed medical professional. I'm a certified brain injury specialist and brain injury educator. So this is a general overview of traumatic brain injury. So make sure you're always working with the doctor, doing what they say is the best for you. All right, so in this, now we're talking about the complications from recovery from a traumatic brain injury. So there are common health conditions that can complicate concussion recovery. For example, post-traumatic stress disorder. And concussion is the result of a traumatic event, but so is post-traumatic stress disorder. And as a result, these two conditions can overlap. You can have 4 people involved in the same traumatic event. One may walk away 100% fine, no issues, no problems. Another may have a concussion, but not PTSD. And the third may have PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder, but no concussion at all. And the fourth may be dealing with the aftermath of both. So we're so different. Where the injury occurs, our bodies are different, how we process things are different. There's so many variables that go into traumatic brain injury diagnosis and recovery that we need to keep in mind. So it can be very tricky, even for doctors, to figure out which symptoms are from post-traumatic stress and which are from a concussion. So when we learn about concussion, it's important to also know what concussion is not, okay? So some of the symptoms are the same, but others are different. So PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and traumatic brain injury have overlapping conditions, but they are not the same thing. So possible symptoms of PTSD are, they may include flashbacks, nightmares, self-destructive behaviors, fearfulness, being startled easily, feelings of guilt, like maybe survivor's guilt, being on high alert all the time. And so let's now go over concussions. So the symptoms of concussion or possible symptoms of concussion, I should say, are, they might include headaches, dizziness, balance problems, so nausea and sensitivity to light and sound. So that's another cue that someone may have had a traumatic brain injury. They have headphones on or earplugs in because they can't, the sound is really amplified by their head injury. So they may have had vision changes after traumatic brain injury or concussion, appetite changes, mood changes. And now the overlapping symptoms are, there's a lot of overlapping symptoms, and those could be sleep problems, trouble with memory, and attention, right? Feeling depressed or anxious, maybe having some fatigue or always being tired and not being able to function like they used to, being more irritable. Those are all overlapping symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and TBI, or traumatic brain injury. So notice that the concussion symptoms include many more physical complaints. So physical rest is a key to concussion recovery with that stepped approach to getting back to your normal activities. So now let's talk about multiple concussions. It's so important to get seen right after you have that concussion to start your recovery process. But recovery following multiple head injuries. So if someone had a head injury, they didn't take it easy and gradually step back into their normal activities, and then they fell, or they've gotten another traumatic brain injury or concussion really quickly after. There's a lot of issues that can occur. So recovery following multiple head injuries is still expected, though the recovery time can sometimes take longer, especially as we age. So that can also hinder that process. So normal recovery can take up to 6 months or more from multiple concussions or traumatic brain injuries. So this is one of the reasons that why we really want to discuss the importance of prevention. It's so important to prevent a traumatic brain injury from happening, but especially after you've had one recently. So, so it's really important to take steps to avoid another head injury and to minimize that recovery time. So to experience a full recovery between events, try to avoid experiencing multiple concussions close together. So let me give you an example that may make it a little bit more clear. So you've had a head injury when you're five years old, then again when you're 12 years old, and then you have another one when you're 75, right? And you've had no recovery issues. Inversely, if you've had back-to-back head trauma within a few weeks of each other, it may take longer for your brain to fully heal, and it may require treatment from a multidisciplinary team. It's like neuropsychologist, to help you with the mental health issues that you may be having, more PT, physical therapy, occupational therapy, more doctors, a larger team of professionals to help you with the second traumatic brain injury that happens right after the first. All right. So this is a really good page for you to take a look at, because this shows you in a picture where those overlapping symptoms are. So you'll see the possible symptoms of TBI on the left-hand side and the possible symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder on the right-hand side. So we sometimes hear PTSD and TBI thrown around as one and the same. And it's really important to remember that they're different entities. So I really want you to take that away today after this presentation, that PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and traumatic brain injury are different entities. They do have a lot of, like, as you'll see in front of you on the screen, they do have some overlapping symptoms, but they're two different things. And they could happen together, right? You could have both. So it's really tough to diagnose at times. And, for our veterans, sometimes it's hard to get them the services or service-related injury that they require in order to get treatment, because it's so difficult to diagnose and to get that process started. So the the same event that caused the TBI could have also caused PTSD, to which it would then be a co-occurring condition. There are symptoms that you find in both PTSD and TBI, and individually, and then there are overlapping symptoms: fatigue, sleep issues, irritability. Right there in the middle, you'll see that. Anxiety. And it's sometimes difficult to know if the symptoms you're experiencing are from PTSD or from TBI. And then there are symptoms that are more associated with PTSD and some that are more associated with TBI. Okay, so it can be really confusing. All right. So this is just another, multiple concussions are such a big deal. And, for people, that I wanted to make sure to reiterate them again, that the symptoms can be more severe with each additional concussion, and they may take longer to resolve. They may also cause, they're more likely to cause brain swelling or brain bleeding, right? And the symptoms can be more extreme. All right, now let's talk about the good stuff, what you can do to prevent a traumatic brain injury. So we've all heard a lot of these things from our public health department and our campaigns in the public health department, but these are really important to be aware of. So wearing a helmet when you're riding a bike or motorcycle, or any protective gear that you need when you're doing high-risk activities, like snowboarding, skiing, if you're going fast down hills, wearing safety belts while traveling in motor vehicles. These are all things that we inherently know, but we really need to make sure that we do those things in the moment. Check for obstacles or loose debris when climbing or or walking. Using the buddy system if you're going out on different high-risk activities. Being aware that of the ground, what's on the ground in front of you, to avoid tripping. And if you're a hunter, inspect your weapons properly before handling them, and then using those weapons appropriately. Verifying the target and considering potential for ricochet prior to firing the weapon, if you know that person's a hunter. So that that also applies to our military personnel. All right. So what do we do if an injury occurs? So it's better to be safe than sorry when it comes to a TBI, because you often can't see the injury once it's occurred. You may think, oh, I'm fine, I just felt a little dizzy, or I knocked my head and I blacked out for a couple minutes, but I should be fine, no big deal. But it is a big deal. You need to get seen as close to that injury as possible. Get screened, remember to rest and gradually return to activity along with that doctor's help. And don't forget that most people recover fully from a traumatic brain injury and concussions. If you continue to have symptoms after a few months, make sure you talk to your primary care provider. Even if the symptoms are really severe after a few weeks, don't listen to that time frame. If the symptoms are really bothering you, you need to seek help right away. Okay, making sure that you're advocating for yourself and your loved ones if you've had a concussion or traumatic brain injury. Working to modify your environment to prevent another concussion from happening. Wearing a helmet, being cognizant of your surroundings. All right. So we've arrived at our last section here. So in this section, we'll discuss some of our resources that can aid in the recovery process. And I'll tell you a little bit more about our organization. So the Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center, DVBIC, was established in 1992 to integrate specialized TBI care, research, and education across the military and veteran medical care systems. So we're tasked to track and evaluate head injury survivors, to ensure their appropriate treatment and to rehabilitate them. And then we also study treatment outcomes and counsel and educate family members on how to best care for people with traumatic brain injury. All of our resources are available to the general public on our website. So that's DVBIC, like what you see there, DVBIC.dc divbic.deco.mil. And they're available for you for free for download. They're usually downloaded to a PDF, and you can print those out or email them to somebody. And so our mission is to serve active duty service members, their families, their beneficiaries, and also veterans with TBI through state-of-the-art clinical care, innovative clinical research initiatives, educational programs, and to support force health protection services, and to make sure that our warfighters are healthy and ready. So DivBIC fulfills all of those mission requirements through the ongoing collaborations that we have with the DoD, Department of Defense, military services, Department of the Veterans Affairs, civilian health partners like the public health departments, the libraries, also local communities and families, also individuals with traumatic brain injury. I think everybody's life has been touched by a veteran or a service member. And so we're here for everybody. So we're not just exclusively for service members and veterans. So we're here for you if, you know, because we realize that everybody's been affected or touched by a service member or veteran in their life or is related to one. So by proxy, you are our population of interest that we want to help. So that's how we help. Here's our locations. I'm located in Palo Alto at the VA, usually. I am working from home these days because of COVID-19, but I am still working virtually and covering all of Northern California, Oregon, Washington, and also Nevada. We also have our Camp Pendleton location and our Naval Medical Center, San Diego. And those two centers have people like myself, regional education coordinators, that assist with our Southern California locations. And our headquarters is in Silver Springs, Maryland. So we're mostly located at military bases, and that's throughout the world. So we're also located in Germany at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, Alaska at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. So wherever you move, we will have resources for you, and I can connect you with somebody that can help you if you've had a traumatic brain injury. There are a number of different mobile applications that can help with managing symptoms of a traumatic brain injury, breathing to relax. We hear about Headspace and all these different apps, Calm, I guess, that cost money. All of our apps are free for anybody to access, and they're available on Android and Apple usually. Usually they're on both. So I believe these ones are on both. So those are a couple of our different apps. Breathe to Relax. It's progressive muscle relaxation. They have a lot of cool stuff there. Helping you with rewrite nightmares. So we have helping you with better sleep, the Dream Easy. And then we have our caregiver, our family needs line. So talking to children about TBI. How do you explain to a child whose parents are suffering from a traumatic brain injury? Well, we take into account that stage of development and that child's understanding, what they're able to understand at that age and that stage. And we created a booklet for helping them explain that to children. We've also created a booklet to help parents get their children back to school after a traumatic brain injury by working with it's mandated by the state of California, by the government, that the schools help children that have had a concussion or a traumatic brain injury. And this gives you this little booklet right here, which you can download off our website, can give you all of that information to help you through that process. We have a number of resources for caregivers, how to take care of yourself while caring for others, addressing family needs after a traumatic brain injury, talking to children with about moderate to severe traumatic brain injury. And we produced a couple of different children's books that are available in some of our libraries. We also produced a number of fact sheets. So if someone's having a hard time with sleep, they can just download that fact sheet on healthy sleep after a TBI. Let's see here. Managing headaches, that's another really important one. We also produced a number of documentaries on veterans. So in the non-deployed setting, people that have sustained a traumatic brain injury. We did a documentary series on the caregiver, the family member, different people in that person's life that have, and how they've worked through that. Maybe they have 5 kids and they've had a severe TBI. Well, how did they manage that? And it gives people pointers on how they can get through it themselves. It's really inspirational. Here is our website address, like I mentioned before, and all of our resources are there. Download and order resources. You'll see that on your right-hand side. You click on that and you'll see all of the resources that we produced. We even produced a book for college students, how to get back, how to have academic success after a traumatic brain injury. It's a whole booklet on different tools and resources for that service member or veteran, or even somebody in the general population that has had a TBI. How do you get back into college, and how do you work with the disability resources, and what kind of things can you put into place, like your schedule and who's your main point of contacts? It can all be found in those books. Okay. All right. So do we have any questions at this time?
There haven't been any in the chat. I also put your website in there.
Okay.
If anyone needs it. Alex, did you have any questions for Jessica while we have her? Okay. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for this presentation. Alex does not have any questions. And so I, again, am recording this, and we'll have the recording available on the Tulare Public Library website soon, maybe even later today. And just want to take a moment to invite you, both of you, to some future virtual programs that we will have available through our website and our Facebook. Next 2 weeks from now, we have the California Service Dog Academy is going to do a presentation on service dogs and how to, if you want to train one, or if you need one, or you know someone who needs one. They are specific to veterans, as well as they are local here in the Tulare area. And if you don't mind, Jessica, I'm just going to ask you not to share your screen, and that way I can pull up, I can share my screen. And thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'm going to go ahead and just show on our website where you can get the information for these programs that are coming up. Another one that's coming up is actually, this is our website, and having trouble scrolling here. We have a concert coming up, the Bearded Uke, which is a ukulele concert, and it is also going to be dedicated to veterans. This is a lot of our summer programming. Excuse me for this, clicking around. The calendar, I'm sorry, has our live events. We have some recorded and some live. And so here's on the 16th at 12 o'clock is the California Service Dog Academy, and that speaker will be one of the trainers, and there might even be some puppies involved, so that's going to be fun. And then on the 18th is the concert from the Bearded Uke. So again, thank you so much, Jessica, for being here. Oh my goodness, did I lose you?
Nope, I'm here.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Where'd my Zoom meeting go?
I just put you on, I put myself on mute so I didn't interrupt.
That's okay. That's all right. Okay, well, thank you so much. And if there aren't any further questions, I'm gonna let you go for today, and I'll stop the recording as well.
Thank you.
All right. Everybody have a good one. Stay safe.
You too.
Okay. All right.